Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Tim Golden here, founder of Compliance Scorecard. We have one of our great friends, Hendrik, here with us today. Hendrik, take an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been around for a long, long time. Sort of started in the sort of PC-based area of compute in 1993, coming from mainly mainframes and mid-range computing based on Unix and BSD 4.2, and then moved into PCs when the first 8086 computer was coined, and started in networking from Novell ELS 1.1 onwards, and been
Wow,
in this sort of game since those early days. So I've certainly seen a lot of things come and go, and technologies change, but we've always been very focused on security.
that's awesome. You mentioned an 8088, which I still have in my basement. Remember it had the old, what was it? EGA? It was like green
Yeah,
kind of monochromic monitor. Had this and it
that's
had
correct.
like it was like this big and it had like
Yeah,
one megabyte.
that's right.
And
Yeah, we're the old, because I worked in the CAD industry for one of the large government departments in Australia in the beginning, and the way we used to align the old cathode ray tube monitors, which is what you're
hmm
referring to, is with
yep.
bits of magnets and glue
hmm
on the back of
Yeah.
that and a mirror.
Yeah,
So take,
I should pull that out of the basement and see if it still powers on, or I should maybe donate it to the Smithsonian or something. But so here you are, fast forward a bazillion years, it's 2024, you're in a, obviously we're in, the other hemisphere, you're over on the other side of the world. Tell me what's going on like now, MSP, MSSP, kind of what you're seeing, what's happening in that side of the world.
yeah, sort of see that a lot of from our colleagues in the business, they a lot of them are shying away from security altogether and just running a more traditional IT stack. Don't want to really get into MSSP area. And I guess what I'm seeing in the client base is that either they lack the will at the senior executive level, and that goes across small, medium, and larger businesses that we see, um, just not really into the compliance as much as our US counterparts are. And I guess that what we're seeing is that the Australian Signals Directorate is making a lot of effort to educate the businesses around Australia. I mean, the ASD and Essential Aid is only really was coined in 2017, so it's not
Mhm.
that long ago
Right.
that the Essential Aid was established. We've been sort of running Essential Aid programs since 2018, when we
Nice.
started on our own bat, trying to run programs, of course, within Word documents and spreadsheets, which is
Mm.
very difficult to do because the relationship
Oh
between all
yeah.
the different components is not there.
Right, right. So kind of just to kind of bring it back and level set, right? And honestly, I hate to use the word compliance, but that's what we do here. And
Yeah,
us in the US as well, like compliance is here. And you mentioned the education component, right? So us, MSPs, MSSPs, IT professionals,
yes,
right? That is a huge part of the conversation. Whether it's here, Australia, New Zealand, Germany,
yeah,
Mexico, Canada, like educating that small business is a huge challenge for the industry, right? And so,
yeah,
when a customer hears compliance, it kind of feels like a scary word, right?
yeah.
Right. And so, one of
But
the things that I think you do really well is to be able to have like, no, 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 this is more of a cyber hygiene kind of conversation. This is
yeah,
good business practices, right?
that's correct. What we're seeing, certainly in some of our clients that are operated by boards and so on, in the area that they will only do compliance as far as that will satisfy the insurance criteria. So I guess what's assisting us in the industry is the insurance industry coming behind and saying, well, if you've got a certain level of security posture, then premiums will be cheaper. And for us,
Mm,
that is often the angle where we can then say, well, let's look at the overall cyber hygiene and
yeah.
tighten that up. Some of the questions are becoming quite probing and invasive from insurance companies.
Yeah, and we face a similar thing here in the United States around insurance. For years, if we had like medical clients in HIPAA, right, they would always say, I don't want to do that. Insurance will take it. That's what I pay insurance for, right? And
Yeah,
we're seeing that sort of cyber insurance starting to drive more compliance kind of activities, right?
yes,
Backup, 2FA, policies, procedures, documentation. We're seeing that here in the US. So it's kind of good to hear like Australia is experiencing some of that as well, right?
yeah,
So
that's,
we as IT professionals can shift that conversation away from the big scary compliance word and
yeah,
more to the, cyber insurance or defensibility words.
that's correct. And I guess that's where the Australian Essential Eight as a framework is very simplistic and basic. And essentially, the first four areas of Essential Eight is all to do with application management, right? So that's where the focus is. So I guess what I see in some of the platforms and part of the problems that customers see, they don't understand the direct relationship between the compliance framework and the actual bits of software or components that needs to go in place on premise. And I think that from what I see is that if we can, as an industry, make it even simpler and say, yep, if you want these first four and compliant from level 1 to 3 on application management, then if you put these components in place, then we'll reach compliance from that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And but what where we got engaged, obviously, with Compliance Scorecard is, as I mentioned in the early days, and certainly up until people in the industry came and provided platforms where we can manage these frameworks more elegantly and have
Mm-hmm.
documentation more centralized, but also having customer engagement is critical from what I see in compliance. If you don't have buy-in at the top level to do with compliance, the program will never succeed. And that's what we see is that once
Yeah.
people adopt or buy in to compliance and understand at a board level what their directors' duties are, and especially in Australia now with director IDs, which is the digital ID for all company
Right.
directors have to have it.
Yep.
There's movements and systems in place where it's going to become a lot harder
Mm-hmm.
for both MSPs, MSSPs, and the client to get away
Right.
with out compliance. And what we
Mm-hmm.
see is platforms become critical because we see some large pharmaceutical companies running the compliance programs in spreadsheets and documents, which makes it very difficult if somebody walks in and say, "Can you show me, where you are at in the compliance and how do you comply?"
Mm-hmm.
Where if we have everything in the centralized platform, it
Right.
makes it so much easier.
Right. So you mentioned, and was in the same boat, right? Spreadsheets and file servers, Word documents, and a mess of stuff like wasn't
Yeah.
organized. And then as an MSP or as an MSSP, I couldn't do that work at scale, right?
Yes, that's correct.
One customer, one framework. Okay, we did that very, very well. And so as we started to get more into that space, like I had to build something. Like been a programmer for decades. If it's in a spreadsheet, it's going in a database and I'm building a web front end because it's
Yeah,
just I'm
yeah,
writing code forever. And so,
yeah,
you know, that's kind of how Compliance Scorecard was born, right? We were
yeah,
tired of spreadsheets. We were tired of disjointed data not talking to
yeah.
each other. And no,
This,
not audits going from weeks on end because stuff was disjointed, right? So that's kind of where
yeah,
we was born out of was, gosh, this manual work was awful. And so
mm,
you fast forward, right? Now we're here. We know compliance is a thing, right? You mentioned digital IDs. They're maybe correct me if I'm wrong. There's no way they're going to get out of something down the road, right?
That's
You know,
correct.
in the US, there's all this stuff about CMMC. I'm not going to get into that conversation. There's all this stuff about like follow a framework. Florida, for example, now
Yeah.
has this kind of safe harbor thing where it's like,
Mm.
hey, if you're following a framework and you're doing your diligence, you can probably get into safe harbor, which is a different
Mm.
conversation. I would
Yeah.
imagine, it's here. It's not going away. It's only
No,
going to get worse. And so
uh,
you as an MSP doing that work at scale, right?
that's correct, and that's part of what we fell in, and it's not until you have a platform that you can work on, and that's where I mentioned we started with one of our pharmaceutical clients in
Mhm.
2018, running an essential aid program, knowing that the Australian Signals Directorate only started the program in 2017, so we were very early adopters, but
Nice.
then found that over time that project stalled because we didn't have the visibility to see how we're tracking against
Mhm.
a base and the progression between the Australia Essential Aid being um, a very cut down version of a couple of hundred controls from the full technical
Yeah.
support manual has got 8 controls with 3 levels. So, whether you have implemented application control, whether you're actually tracking and monitoring it, and whether you're actually logging it. And this
Hmm.
is what we're seeing. The latest publication from Australian Signals Directorate is to do with centralized logging. So we've now gone through the application and hardening and system thing. But what the industry is now saying is unless you log and monitor everything you're doing centrally, it's too difficult to maintain 10
Hmm.
different platforms.
Hmm.
And that's where platforms like Compliance Scorecard, Fort Nisa, and a few others um, help us to do that. And I think for MSPs and MSSPs, where we found success and to get traction is to do a gap analysis.
Hmm.
So if you
Lovely.
do a gap analysis to start with, you often recognize the missing components, and then the conversation can start around that. So you've done a gap analysis. This is what you have. So rather say you've got nothing, provide some positivity back, and then you get permission to move forward with some of the programs. Because once you've done a gap analysis, you've got something you can visualize, and people can see graphically where they're up to.
Right. And it gives you, that ability to mature the customer over time, right?
That is,
So, I always try to like use analogies and relatability. Storytelling is kind of who I am a little bit. And so,
yeah,
I think about like my car is broken. Can you fix it? Well, the mechanic is going to be like, tell me more. I need to do a
yeah,
diagnostic, right? I need to run some tests. And by the way, those tests aren't free, right? I would never be able to walk into my mechanic and say, diagnose my broken thing for free.
yeah,
Maybe, but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be charged a diagnostic fee. So, us as an MSP doing a gap assessment and determining where they are, we should make sure we account for that time and the
yeah.
money that it takes to go into that, right? So, you should
That's
be charging for assessments.
that's
We've
what
seen
we did.
MSPs charging three, four, $5,000 US for just a baseline assessment. Now,
Yeah,
we did that. We did that at our MSP with either prospects or existing customers. We would
yeah,
walk in and we would do an assessment, and then we would build a roadmap on what needs to be done. Right? Your
yes,
car is broken. Great. We diagnosed you need new tires, you need new brakes and an oil change or
yeah,
whatever. And we
yeah,
would build that roadmap. Right. Um, we used to then take, like, hey, we did an assessment. You can pay
mm,
us for that and walk away,
yeah.
right? Now you
Fair
know where you
enough.
stand. Go farm it out to other people. What will end up happening is you'll see that our services are better and you'll
Yeah,
choose our MSP. And if
mm,
not, hey, at least you've got your diagnostic fee.
yeah.
Usually, what that
So
would happen is we would roll that price into an ongoing thing, right?
that's
So
good.
it's a
That's great.
great way for an MSP to have the conversation and be like, "Hey, we found stuff." I mean, you could take it to Bob's mechanic down the street. I mean,
Yeah,
he just graduated high school, but he could probably do it for you, maybe.
yeah,
Or you can bring it to the experts like Hendrix or other
mm,
MSPs, right? And so
yeah,
you provided a lot of really great notes as we kind of set up for this call. We talked about operational maturity. We
yeah.
talked about service delivery, right?
Yes, that's
Cybersecurity
correct.
initiatives, right? Is there some other components that you want to discuss here that I might not have brought up yet?
No, I guess it's just that a lot of providers like ourselves been in the industry for a while. We gain a lot of specialized knowledge because we operate across a number of different customers. So I guess what we're seeing is that we see a breadth and a scope of either threats and different issues within client bases that often the clients don't recognize themselves. And I guess what managed services become a critical component, and managed security as well within the client base. And what we're seeing is that obviously providers like us that have trust within the organization, we are better suited to run these programs for clients, because some of the data that needs to get exposed when you're running these compliance programs are pretty sensitive stuff.
Right.
And unless it's a partner of trust, then you often get into a situation where you have to invite an external third party in to run these programs for the clients. And that's what we possibly see working together with our US colleagues in running compliance programs for each other, because
Yeah.
there's a less of a conflict of interest doing it that way.
Yep.
And it's not just a provider say, oh, well, we'll come and run your compliance program, but essentially we're after your whole IT support, right? So
Yeah.
we'll come in, run
Yep.
compliance, and then take over the support of thing. But that's it.
Yeah, you do bring up an interesting like, you know, when I first started our MSP here, kind of doing that work, like the competition in the area was so adverse, right? They would not want to talk to each other, to work
Yeah,
together, to kind of better together. And so
yeah,
we've actually seen that start to shift here. And, we love that because Compliance Scorecard, we're Switzerland. We want to be
yeah,
better together, right? And by the
yes,
way, I don't want MSP work ever again,
yeah,
but we're starting to see that shift a little bit more where vendors and vendors are working together. MSPs and MSSPs are working. Now, granted, clear line of delineation, clear work responsibilities, of
yes,
course,
yes,
clear agreements, right? But, like you're saying, and I think you might be hinting to like professional services, right?
yes,
People like yourself, been in the industry for years versus
mm,
the, person that just started a year ago or whatever, like
yes,
coming alongside them and mentoring them, working a lot like
yeah,
that is what I love that I've seen in the last several years. And I think
yeah,
COVID actually helped with that, to be honest
yeah,
with you, because
uh,
everybody is remote and we couldn't do things. And so I love
yeah.
the fact that it's starting to change, right? That better together mantra.
Yeah, we've always had that philosophy right through our business career. Been around for over 30 years, and we rather share with other providers and pass part of our deal across to their expertise than trying to handle it in house.
Yeah.
Um, and we find that synergy works a lot better, and you get through projects a lot quicker than
Hmm.
can having projects stall, because suddenly you run out of depth and skill, and then you get caught, and then you're trying to do everything, but you can't be good at everything. And
Right.
yes, I think the maturity of the industry is important, that we all recognize that we're in this thing together as an industry,
Yes.
and we might as well support each other than try and work against each other, because I think that there's enough volume and business, and there's enough scary things happening in our
Hmm.
environment right now, that we can't afford to work against each other, and that's my
You
view
can't.
today,
You can't.
because we just had two crypto locker events
Wow.
in the last 2 weeks through SQL injection and other more advanced things. So we know
Crazy.
how quickly it's takes minutes for things to go wrong, and it will
It
take
does.
weeks and months to fix things. And specifically, what we're finding in these last two events, nobody's got an incident response plan. Right?
Compliance Scorecard has a great template you could use. You can
Yeah,
download
we've
that off of our website, by the way. Sorry, shameless plug.
yeah. We've I guess intuitively do incident response because we've been around for so long, but so we know the right components. But I guess the one thing that kills responsiveness is when the client wants to keep on pressurizing technicians doing the work.
Yeah.
How's it going? When are we going to get fixed? And that's part of the biggest thing I see in incident response is taking the pressure off the engineers actually doing the work and going after
Yep.
the incident and responding to it, where
Yep.
all the other people just want to know when it's going to get fixed. That pressure has to be taken off. So I think a well thought out incident response plan is
Yes.
absolutely critical. And a lot of people forget about the media liaison and the other liaison and the end users and stuff, and taking
The health
that
and
sort of
well-being, right? The health
yeah,
and well-being, both of the one that is infected and the one doing the remediation,
that's
right?
correct.
Part
Yes,
part of our, part of our IRP is there's a list of people, and those
yeah,
people have certain roles and responsibilities, and one of those
absolutely.
is the cheerleader, right? I
Yeah,
hate to use that term, but their sole job is morale, health, and well-being, right? And
yes,
and it, by the way, that's one of the things I used to do in the military was MMR, was that morale, health, and well-being of our troops
yeah,
in my section,
yeah.
in my squad. But yeah, it's interesting. So, as we start to come to a close here, so is there a key takeaway that you want kind of our listeners to kind of think through and kind of, maybe put into practice as it relates to Australian 8 cyber essentials or assessments?
I guess my passion and always has been in education for all our engineers. At the end of the day, is backup and disaster recovery, and that's my key takeaway. If all fails and everything goes wrong, have you got an encrypted backup? Have you done a 3-2-1-1 backup strategy? Because when everything gets bit locked or crypto locked or data gets lost, that is your only final failback position is backups, and that is it's listed as number 8 on the Australian Central 8, but I believe it should be number 1.
Mm,
So you can have none of the other methods in place, but if you've got a good backup system, you can always recover. That's my message, and I find that a lot of providers don't give enough focus on backup and disaster recovery. We back up everything to everywhere for everybody. So if they run on premise, we back up cloud, we back up to another cloud, and we ensure that we've got recovery both on premise and off premise. So no matter what happens to that client, they can always trade. That is the key.
love that. Love that. Backup is essential, right? I would maybe take that a little bit of a step further and have a backup and disaster recovery plan, business
Yes.
continuity plan, and incident response plan, tying all of those things together.
Yeah.
I'll give another, since I love storytelling, I'll give another little anecdote here, right? So we're in New England. We don't get, typhoons and tornadoes, but we do get blizzards. We do get ice storms. And so, this past winter, I don't watch the news. I don't care the weather. I don't generally check that. And I was like, oh, it's snowing outside. Okay.
Mm.
Well, we lost power, which tends to happen. No
Yeah.
problem. I run outside. I pull the generator. I start it up. The house is back on. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, for about 15 minutes until the generator ran out of gas.
Gas, yes.
All right. Well, now I got to go get gas and I got to drive through this nasty storm to 8 different gas stations to find
mm,
gas that was open to, because, we need
mm,
power, was, food, all the things. And so
yeah,
the lesson learned there was I needed to pull out my disaster recovery and my incident response plan. Yes, I'm working from home.
mm,
Does power loss consider, incident response? Well, for us,
yes,
yes, we're a SaaS
yes,
company. I need to be able to do these things, get online,
yeah,
have the power. And so
yeah,
I had to go through and learn the lesson the hard way. Now my IRP, my incident response plan says, make sure you have at least one full tank of gas. And if you empty that, drive over and fill it then and there. So that I don't have to
absolutely,
worry about next time, right? So backup, great to have, obviously, coupled with incident response planning,
yes,
coupled with disaster recovery planning,
yeah,
coupled with business continuity planning,
yeah,
right? And all of those
yeah,
words sound like big, scary things, but as an MSP or an MSP, they don't have to be.
that's
Chances
correct.
are you probably have some of these things already in place.
In
You
place.
just need to write them down and document them. And, there just might be a platform that can help you with that.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
Hendrik, it's always great to have you on. We're excited to have you as one of our partners and a leader in the space, an expert in this stuff. You've been in it for years. We appreciate you coming on and having these conversations. We look forward to hopefully having you on again as we dive deeper into other things.
Thanks, Tim. And yes, thanks to you and your team for being innovative and coming up with new platforms that we can use to be more effective in what we need to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Tim.